So, very, very good morning to those of you who are here on the Zoom this morning, and for those joining us on YouTube later, then good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Today is our second of 3 sessions on this huge topic, the Dharma. And so let's start with a really special moment, doing our prayers, which just voice what I hope our hearts are doing as we prepare for this hour and a half together, exploring the Buddhist teachings, the Dharma. So I hope you all know by now we try and have a big mind and a loving mind and a very, very happy mind as we make these wishes. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on until we reach the very heart of enlightenment, through the practice of generosity and all 6 transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality, to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every being be well, live long, be healthy, be well provided for, have good friends. May they find respect, live in places of peace and plenty, and most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for these good things, good circumstances, to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being that's totally beyond suffering, and attain the great equanimity that's free of closeness or distance to anyone. Dayata shame shamawati shameta shatra om kure marajite karota kiyorita jowati oloyane peshudane male malapa naye kukure kaka grasana Om Mukhi Paramukhi Amukhi Shamme Dawane Sawagraha Bandhanane Nigre Hitva Sawa Bhava Pravadina Vimukta Marapasha Sabitva Buddha Mudra Ganu Gatita Sava Mare Putsarita Parishude Piga Shantu Sava Mara Kama. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our head on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. So this huge topic and this presumptuous attempt to sum it all up in a couple of hours, all the Buddhist teachings, everything that happened since the Buddha, thousands of years of Buddhists and great Buddhist thinkers and scholars and practitioners, but it's to give us an overview and maybe open up a few doors of reflection that hadn't been opened so far. 1 or 2 points from the first teaching, which was 2 weeks ago, which are very important. Where we started was with the real Dharma, and then the Dharma as concepts, or it's called conventional Dharma or scriptural Dharma, anything that can be talked about, discussed, written down, and so on, that for many people is the Dharma, or the scriptures. When we take refuge in the Dharma with a visualization, then we have Buddha, we have a Buddha image. The Dharma is a whole stack of books, ideas. Real Dharma, there we looked at the meaning of the word Dharma. It's actually the Sanskrit word for things as they really are, things. So Buddha just taught things as they really are. All the various things of the material universe, the mental universe, but more importantly, how they work together. And especially how they work together in the production of karma that makes us each who we are. That's the most important thing. Who am I? Why am I me? Why am I not like you? Why are we so unique? Why, and then why in particular, is there this suffering in my life? These problems, these obstacles, and so on. Why do we die? What happens when we die? All of this. Dharma, the reality of things. Before anybody thinks about it, codifies it, makes a religion, makes a philosophy, what's happening? What's actually happening? What we experience. That's Dharma. So in the prayers we just did, it says, after may people be well, be respected and all of that, it says, most of all, may they practice Dharma. And some people think, yeah, it's a bit weird, You want everyone to become Buddhist. Don't you think there's any good in other faiths? It doesn't mean that. It means whatever is truth, whatever is the true way things are. May people live in understanding of that, in harmony with things as they are, rather than living in conflict with things as they are and creating suffering. Doesn't mean may they sign up and become Buddhists, become any religion. But we're hoping what the Buddha's teaching was about. There was no Buddhism when the Buddha taught. He didn't have a religion to sell. He just was telling people how it is, helping them understand for themselves. That real Dharma is very important for us to understand, because Dharma as a religion is very powerful, very present. We see lots and lots of lamas. They think Dharma is about building temples, it's about reproducing books, teaching texts, and so on. It becomes a world apart, which is the last thing in the world it ought to be. It ought to be the world as it is, as we experience it, not we have this whole religious world of Dharma. And we go off and we practice Dharma. There's something else. It's not something else. It's about what's happening right now, all the time. The truth and so on, the non-truths. So that's a very important point. We'll come back to that today. And then we looked at the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma, or the 3 levels of the Buddhist teacher, which is also very important, basic topic for us to grasp, and in particular about our own options as Buddhists and for practice. And we saw that the first level is all about getting ourselves out of the web of suffering, out of the power of distraction, the power of harmful tendencies where we harm ourselves, we harm each other. It's all about bringing an end to suffering. That's the first and the absolutely basic, must-have, must-do message of the Buddha, the most basic Dharma. It's embodied in the four truths, which are all about suffering. Suffering, what causes it? Can we go beyond it? Yes. And how do we go beyond it? The path. The four great truths. Second turning of the wheel of Dharma, where for those who have the propensity, the capacity from past lives of a big heart, and they can work not just to get themselves out of suffering, but they have the ground, the potential, what it takes to become a bodhisattva and help others out of suffering. Then there's a second turning of the wheel of Dharma, which shows you not just how to get out of suffering, but how to become a Buddha. And the only way to become a Buddha is through compassion, and the only way to really develop compassion is in a field of interaction with other beings and their lives and their situations through the 6 paramitas. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma is embodied in the 2 truths, relative truth and ultimate truth. The way to become Buddha is to really understand, not understand up there, real Dharma, the reality of what ultimately, absolutely we are, but relatively how things manifest and how we delude ourselves and how we can go beyond delusion. So relative and ultimate truth, the 2 truths. Third turning of the wheel of Dharma, for those who can get it without instantly mistaking it for a God or a being or a something, is the truth about Buddha nature. The one great truth of Buddha nature. So it's quite nice. We've got the 4 truths, the 2 truths, the one great truth of the awakened reality. If we say Buddha nature, it's one thing. We can say the truth of the totally awakened reality, which is Buddha. So today, having remembered those 2 key points from the first talk, then we are going on to look at Dharma in several different ways. The first, I think, we have to look at Dharma from the outside as the Buddha's teachings that became a faith, a religion, whatever we want to call it, and how that spread. And we do need to know something of that, because most of us here, one way or another, ended up with Tibetan Buddhism as a part of our life. And the history, where it came from, of Dharma, is a vital part of understanding what Tibetan Buddhism is. So we need to look a bit at history, and I'm putting all of my brakes on because, as many of you know, I get carried away with history, and that becomes boring for most people. So I'll make that as, as brief as possible, and then we'll have a look at Dharma in terms of conceptual Dharma, scriptural Dharma, the actual content of the Buddha's teaching as it's preserved in writing and living traditions of people who understood those writings and have a living tradition of understanding to pass down. And then thirdly, today, we'll look at Dharma in terms of our own lives. So that's the menu. And if you want to switch off now, now's the time, if you don't like the menu. So where are we? Dharma history. As you'll know, as I've often pointed out over the last couple of years, but this talk, this series of talks have to stand on their own feet, so I have to repeat some things. Dharma was in India for some 16 centuries, 1600 years. That's a long time. It started in India, and it carried on in India with ups and downs until the 12th century, from the time of Buddha to our 12th century. We have barely any records from India of what happened. All we have is what was literally written in stone. We have ruins. We have ruins. And for many reasons, two main reasons. One is that writing was done on perishable materials, and India is a country with a powerful climate, monsoons, and the perishable materials perished. So anything that was written on, and they didn't have paper for a long time, and they used bamboo, they used leaves, they used birch bark, all sorts of things to write on. Paper that we take for granted is an amazing thing, but they didn't have it. And so, for instance, the history tells us that the first, or it wasn't the first, that all of the Buddhist canon was written down in Pali in the 1st century of our era. But the only non-metallic writing or non-stone writing we have in Pali is from the 16th century. Everything else perished. India, Sri Lanka, the climate, paper, written materials don't last. So the earliest Pali teaching we have is on a sheet of gold carved in Pali, and that sheet of gold was placed in the middle of a stupa in Burma, actually. That's the earliest, and that's from the 6th century. Anyway, they're just examples. Written stuff, so that's mainly all the scriptures or historical writings, the stories of the monasteries, the stories of Dharma, nothing. Nothing. Because what you carve in stone is usually very simple things. You don't carve whole stories in stone or onto metal. The other reason, beside the perishability of the materials and the fact that Buddhism was destroyed in India in the 12th century, finished, and stuff was left to perish. Now, what I should have put on screen, I better not go searching for it now, but many of you know the great stupa in Bodh Gaya we go to as pilgrimage. Huge, huge monument. Well, if you see how that was discovered by British explorers, or actually they were British Empire soldiers and merchants who had a lot of spare time and became archaeologists and curious. When you see that great stupa, it was literally almost all covered in earth and a few crumbling ruins. And so many things just disappeared in the jungle, Buddhist things, no trace at all. So we know so little about Indian Buddhist history. So the first thing we'll do today is to just, for me to give you okay, so can you put a hand up if you can see the chart? Yeah, good, okay. Now, where's this? Okay. So this timeline works from the bottom up. So at the very bottom, you've got the life of Buddha. The dates we use minus 623 before our era to 543, 80 years. So that, and then in the next column was in India, Buddha in India. On the very left column, in numbers, we see the centuries. So we see that 6th, 5th, 4th centuries before BCE. Then Buddhism was only in India. The first place it went to outside of India is in the 3rd century before our era. And now what I made this chart, 15 years ago. I should have put not just Sri Lanka, I should have added to that Gandhara. We'll look at that in a minute. But anyway, in the first place, so this is already, if you look, this is already 300 years after the Buddha, as it went to Sri Lanka. If you can see the tiny, it doesn't show on here, yellow arrow going upwards from Sri Lanka. From Sri Lanka, the next place it went to was Burma, Myanmar, and Thailand, but from Sri Lanka, not from India. And it went to those in the 1st century of our era, so that's another 300 years gone by, before Buddhism spreads to its next destination. If we look in the second column now, you'll see that from the 1st century onwards, Mahayana Buddhism as something very distinct becomes established in the Indian subcontinent strongly, has a lot of presence. You look above that, it's only from the 5th century onwards in India that Vajrayana becomes widespread. Now this is as far as we know, because there are some accounts of what was in monasteries, big buildings, big universities, monasteries. What happened in the jungles, on mountain tops, with gurus and ashrams, no trace. We've no idea what there was. But Vajrayana is a huge part of Indian Buddhism from the 5th century onwards, until through invasions from Central Asia. In the 12th century, Buddhism disappeared from India. That's it. And it's only in the last 20th, 21st centuries that it's now gained ground. So in India for, 1,500 years, exported bit by bit, as we see in the next column, and surviving in the exported countries, but not in its homeland. So from Sri Lanka, it went to Myanmar and Thailand. Then Mahayana spread also to Sri Lanka and went to China in the 3rd century of our era, and to China, and from China to Korea in the 4th century. Chan Buddhism went to China in the 6th century. Tibet got its Buddhism in a first wave in the 8th century. Japanese Buddhism, not until the 10th century, so there we're 1,500 years after the Buddha. And what first went to Japan was Pure Land teachings, Amitabha mainly. In the 11th century, there was a huge transfusion of Dharma from India to Tibet. Although Tibet's a remote place, it's a neighbor for thousands of kilometers of the Indian border. So a lot of Dharma went across with Mapa, with Atisha, and the great names of those of the 11th century. Chan Buddhism went from China to Japan and became Zen. Zen is just the Japanese corruption of Chan, same word, pronounced differently, in the 12th century. Zen. And then if we go right to the top, then we see 19th century, mainly through the empires, British Empire, French Empire, Theravada Buddhism, because a lot of the empire was going to the Spice countries, Southeast Asia, and Theravada Buddhist countries mainly. Theravada Buddhism came west, came to Europe in the 19th century a bit, in the 20th century much, and also, as you can see from the colors, in the 20th century, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana Buddhism all came to the West. So that's the first kind of how Buddhism spread as a faith. The details of that are very many, very many details. So we're just not going there. It's a huge and complicated story, how each country got its Buddhism. And anyway, we'll leave that. Now, if we carry on further, right, we see that just after Buddha passed, there were the oral traditions of Sutra and Vinaya. In the Theravada official story, there were Sutra and Vinaya and also Abhidharma. But Abhidharma now, in light of modern research, is so obviously a later invention that the Theravadas, how can you say, they rewrote history very nicely, so that Abhidharma, which is a very, very big deal for them, was there from the beginning. Of course, it's implicit in the Buddha's teachings. The teachings are there, but they're not all gathered from different discourses and put together to make a science, which is what Abhidharma is. So the truth of the matter is that in India, there were oral traditions and of Sutra and Vinaya from immediately after the Buddha's time. Abhidharma, as an analysis of those teachings, really only evolved, as you can see, in the 3rd century BC, when writing started to be used in India. 3rd century is an important time in the history because of King Ashoka. India was many, many small kingdoms, and Ashoka was a warrior who militarily made the first united India as a country. And like a few great names in Buddhist history, the first half of his life was as a warrior uniting a kingdom. And the second part of his life was spreading Buddhism, spreading education, medical care. So Ashoka, we'll come back to him in a minute, unified India. He put a lot of his enormous wealth, let's not wonder quite how he got it or where he got it, but he had an amazing amount of richness from his conquest into building monasteries, having Buddhism put into writing, sending Buddhist missionaries outside of India to spread the word.
Sounds like a familiar story.
Just a moment. Someone needs to turn off their microphone. I can't do it while I'm sharing the screen. So anyway, he sent, and also medical missionaries. because he was very concerned with healthcare. So Atisha in the 3rd century really promoted writing. The famous Ashoka columns that he put over India were in 4 different languages, and it kind of helps us understand that India didn't really have its own script. They used foreign languages, Greek, and 3 others. And one of the 3 others was what we now call Brahmi script, Brahmi, like Brahma, and that was evolved from the Aramaean type scripts, and it became Sanskrit and many other languages. So anyway, that's the whole story of linguistic research. But the thing to remember, Ashoka, unification of India, huge amount of cash and power put into Dharma. Dharma spread abroad through Ashoka sending people, and writing starts. Once there was writing, then in the next century, Abhidharma developed. Once you can write, you can take notes, you can put information together, you can make these analyses of mind and matter according to the Buddhist teaching that are Abhidharma, the 3rd of the 3 baskets of the Tripitaka. A lot happened because of that, but it took a long time before the first big Buddhist monastic university, Nalanda, which seems to have been the first university in the world, was created. So that's in the 5th century. And then very quickly around that, other monastic universities. Of course, there were monasteries before that, and there were libraries. But monastic universities as international places of study, the 5th century. So we'll come back to that as well. The first tantric texts, not the first tantric practices, but texts that turned up in monasteries, is in the 6th century. Now, one more thing to look at here before I take this off screen. At the very top, you see these 2 models of the Buddhist traditions. One, which was believed by most people until the 1990s to have been the truth of the matter, is called a single trunk model, where the Buddhist teachings were pretty much the Buddhist teachings. But then as time went by and as the teaching spread to other places, then you got Mahayana, or the beginnings of Mahayana, this school and that school. And so gradually, just like you have a single trunk and then that becomes main branches and then sub-branches. So the Theravada tradition promoted this model because they said, we were the pure and original trunk that gave rise to everything else. What we have and what we maintain was added to by other traditions. Not true. But a wonderful bit of propaganda that we'll come back to later on. The other model from a single trunk is that from the very beginning, there were various versions of the Buddhist teachings. So this is like some of those bushes or plants where even though you've got a root under the ground, you already get several stems coming up. I'm not much of a botanist, but you can probably think of those. So the one root is the Buddhist teaching, but the idea is from the time of Buddha onwards already, there were different versions. So now that's the chart that I've sent you. And so there's that. According to the Theravadins, there were, after the time of Buddha, 4 Buddhist councils. And these councils was are supposedly important in establishing the Buddha's teachings. And so we must know about them. They are very famous. And when the Karmapa was talking about Buddhist history a year or two ago, then he spent a lot of time on that first council. So it's quite important to know. We have no historical evidence at all. And so, where to start? And keeping it simple. We do know, and this is the good bit, is the Sherlock Holmes bit of investigation. We do know through poking into the Theravada's own scriptures, what are called the Agamas, that were written very soon after, not written, which came into being. They weren't written shortly after the Buddha's life. We know that during the time of Buddha, already there was a tension between two very, very important people in the Buddha's following, Ananda and Kashyapa, Mahakashyapa. It's a strange story. If you look in many temples, when you see a statue of the Buddha, you'll see on either side the image of his two main disciples, Shariputra, Moggallana. They were born in the same year. They died at the same time, so they had a curious karma. 7 weeks before the Buddha died. His two main disciples gone. The Buddha on his way out, not very well. And so then in that time, Buddha obviously aware of his own departure and giving advice to those he was leaving behind him. He appointed Kashyapa as the head of the Sangha, but he made it very clear, he is not my successor. There will be no successor, and we need to know, it's a very important point in this overview of the Dharma. He said, what I've taught you, the Dharma, my teaching, that's my successor. If you come to the Dharma, you come to me. He was such a wise teacher, the Buddha, because I've seen in the 20th century spiritual movements that started, and like Gurdjieff, brilliant teacher, but already the first generation of his disciples and the second generation of their disciples, how much is lost. And I've seen that with other 20th century teachers. Buddha did not want to leave Dharma in the hands of anybody. He said, I've taught it fully. But the Sangha does need a leader, a guide, so he made Kashyapa. Now Kashyapa, in all of his story, he's a loner. He loves nothing more than to go off and meditate. So after Moggallana and Shariputra died, Kashyapa was the most skilled meditator, or the most experienced meditator the Buddha had. And he was a discipline freak, if we put it in modern terms. He was very hot on following the rules. I'm trying to paint, and we don't have much information, but a character. I'm hoping you're getting something of somebody who is, like that. Disciplined all the time, any moment possible. Meditate, staying in the dhyanas, the meditations, the absorptions. I've actually seen one of the places he's supposed to have meditated in. It's so ascetic. He's also supposed to be the one most accomplished in ascetic practices. It's a pile of stones to make walls very low, just low enough to sit in, simple roof. In the hot Indian sun near the top of a hill, It wasn't the most comfortable place, but that was where he would pop off and meditate whenever he could. So Buddha made him head of the Sangha. Ananda, very different personality. He was the person who was Buddha's attendant. He served the Buddha for longer than anybody. He had a perfect memory, perfect recall, photographic memory. He recalled all of everything the Buddha said while he was serving him. And he was the great friend of the Sangha. Whenever people had disagreements, problems, they came to him. He fixed things. He was like a great mother figure for the Sangha. And also, he was the bridge between the Buddha and the people. They got to see the Buddha through him. Very warm-hearted, knows everybody, that kind of a person, very different. And so when we come to the first council, it was organized by Mahakashyapa along with the king of Rajgir, if we follow the story that's in Theravada history. And there they decided on what the Buddha had taught and what the Sangha should memorize from then on as the Buddha's teaching. No writing, only an oral tradition and memory. Before his death, Buddha has said, when I'm gone, you don't need to keep the minor rules that have appeared, only the major rules. But in the first council, Mahakashyapa said, no, I think we better keep all the rules. So the Vinaya, the monks and nuns' conduct, so maybe you know these days if somebody becomes a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, bhikkhus over 200 vows you take. Bhikkhuni, it's over 300. All of those, Kashyapa said we must keep. Wasn't what the Buddha had said, but what Kashyapa had decided in the first council. And Nanda knew the Buddha didn't want that. And so there was already disagreement in the first council, which happened in the year after the Buddha's passing, in tangled bush, many stems. Also, we have records in the Theravada's own account of people who turned up after the first council, and they said, but I heard the Buddha teach this. And they were people with excellent memory, perfect recall. They said, that's not included. But as far as one version's concerned, too late. So all of this is simply to tell you that from the 1990s onwards, because of the Sanskrit texts that were found in Pakistan and that came from the Swat Valley and the Afghanistan area, we know that there was a very varied Buddhism in India before the year zero. Certainly there were Buddhist scriptures earlier than the Pali Canon was written. And even Theravada scholars, major scholars, have realized that the Theravada version of the one stem, the original pure Dharma, is it's just not the case. So I hope I haven't spent too long on that, but I've seen in my lifetime people who fell for it. They say, oh, I'm fed up with Tibetan Buddhism. I'm going to the Theravadas because they've got the pure and the original version of the Buddha's teaching. Any tradition obviously thinks it's got the genuine version of the Buddha's teaching. You're not going to say, well, we preach a false version of the Buddha's teaching. They've got the right one, but we prefer the false one. Of course not. We all believe we got the best version, the full version of the teachings. Now, what happened? One thing we do know, thanks to China, thanks to Chinese Buddhist pilgrims, some of them who went to India. They went to India, huge journeys. And when you look at their journeys, just amazing what they did. The earliest one, I think it's the other one's Fashian. He was over 70 years old when he left China. And he made this huge pilgrimage across the Taklamakan Desert, down into India, all across the main places. On the way, he went through Gandhara, and he wrote about everything, because he wanted to take back a full account to China, to the emperor. Went back by boat. So we get three main pilgrims. We get Fashian from 337 to 422 was his life, so 4th century of our era. Xuanzang from he's in the 7th century, and then also 7th, 8th century Yixing. Those three taught us so much about Buddhism in India. Those three people in that short period of time told us more about Indian Buddhism than any Indian ever did. The whole of Indians in 1600 years. We don't have the information they gave us. What's important to know is that from their accounts, we see they went through Gandhara, Pakistan, Kashmir, down into central India, all the great Nalanda monastic universities, down some of them into the south of India. That although there were many traditions of Buddhism in India, Theravada, Mahayana, and so on, they didn't have their own monasteries. There were monasteries, and people were very happy to live together. And Joe practiced Theravada, Fred next door practiced Mahayana. They got on fine. They respected each other. There was this wonderful harmony, respect. When we look at Nalanda, the teachings there, how they're reported, all of it. So there weren't sects in that sense with their own monasteries or leaders. There was, maybe it's like Western philosophy in universities. You study everything. Some person prefers to follow Hegel, another one prefers to follow this one or the Greeks. And people respect each other's views. They're happy to debate, share ideas. It was like that. Then if we go now to the 12th century, to Sri Lanka, we come across another warrior king. First half of his life, he is uniting Sri Lanka. It was 3 small kingdoms. So his name is Parakrama Bahu. He united Sri Lanka. He even made warfare abroad. He thought Buddhism was in a bit of a state of disarray, married monks and that kind of thing. He wanted to bring order. So his own teacher was a Theravada, and then they made it, everyone becomes Theravada. If you're not happy with that, you can leave the island. You can leave Sri Lanka. Everything had. Now in Sri Lanka at the time, there was Mahayana Buddhism, there was Vajrayana, Chinresic practice, and there was Theravada Buddhism. All the monasteries, all the practitioners had to only practice Theravada and accept that as the only way, or else leave. Because of the influence after that of Sri Lanka on the southern Buddhist countries, mainly Thailand and Burma, to a certain extent Laos, then this pure and original idea was developed. It wasn't like that in India. So anyway, I've done it. I've spent more time than I wanted on history, but I think it's important anyway. So now I've got I want to share another thing, I can't find it. Oh, here. Okay, can you put a hand up if you can see it? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so now here is a map, and it's not all at the same time map. So the yellow bit is the 3rd century BC, King Ashoka, and the missionaries that he sent abroad. And what's interesting is they went north, south, east, and west. But in particular, they went north. If you look, I haven't got a pointer when I share the screen. So if you look to the very top of the map, you'll see Gandhara, Kashmir, what the Tibetans called Udayana, Guru Rinpoche's land. So that was the Swat Valley and Gandhara, what's now Pakistan, Afghanistan. Buddhism went there, and it really made a big hit. So, in the time of Ashoka, he sent missionaries west. They got as far as Greece, and there was one Greek king who converted to Buddhism. His name was Milinda. We find Greek Buddha heads on Greek coins. It went east into Burma, so the eastern yellow arrow, and it went south all the way to Sri Lanka. That's Ashoka's time. The red circles show some of the big areas of Buddhist development. The big one around, it's almost in the center of the map, the big circle. That's around Bihar, Bodh Gaya, where Buddha taught, and Nalanda, and so on. The one just below it, to the right, is what's now Bangladesh, Bengal, very big center of Buddhist learning. Up at the top, the red circle, Kashmir and Gandhara, huge centers of Buddhist learning that have only become apparent in the last 30 years. We're learning so much about them now and how important they were. Towards the center, south of India, it says Andhra Pradesh, then there, Nagarjuna and other people maybe came from there, and Sri Lanka. So what's interesting, from the top circle, Buddhism went to China along the Silk Road. Buddhism went to Greece along the same Silk Road. So a huge spread. And where Gandhara is so interesting is because it was on the Silk Road, then there was so much learning that spread along the Silk Road. Wisdom, information about other cultures. So, for instance, the Greek art of statue making traveled to Gandhara. From Gandhara, it went to India. So we get the first images of Buddha who look like Greeks. So when you find the oldest images of Buddha, it's very much a Greek style. They look very much like Greeks. And anyway, mustn't get lost. But anyway, the point is to show some of the main centers from which Buddhism spread. Then they each have their own history and peak times, destruction, and so on and so on. So that was a quick look at history, a quick look. Just so we've got some idea of Buddhism. Started with Buddha, spread through India, went to other countries, stopped in India, and then those other countries have their own stories. why they've got that aspect of Buddhism, how it clicked with the local people, and so on. And in particular, we know something of Tibetan history. Tibetans, unlike Indians, were very great historians. We know a lot about India that we know from Tibetans as well, and what they tell us about the India they visited. Now, of course, it's a huge, huge topic, and very important for us if we want to understand where the teachings we're listening to, where they came from, and how they evolved. But now let's change topic and look at Dharma itself. Now, the word Dharma is Sanskrit, and we saw in the first talk that it has 10 meanings in Sanskrit, and its root meaning for all of them is what holds the essence. So what holds the very nature. Like fire is fire, water is water. This is this type of mental event, and this is this type. And Buddha taught things, the essential character of everything and how they work together. That meaning of Dharma. When it was translated into Tibetan, it became Chu. In Tibetan, there's another word, Chu, which sounds almost, if not exactly the same, which has the meaning to heal, to restore, to make good, to make whole. And this is taken as a secondary meaning by many Tibetan teachers for what is Dharma. And it's a wonderful meaning. It's a wonderful meaning. In other talks, we've looked at the 5 great sciences, they're called, 5 great fields of study within Buddhism. The first one is causality, cause and effect, karma, but also all cause and effect, how everything comes from causes and conditions. That's studying the isness, the Dharma, Chu in the first sense. The second great science or field of study in Buddhism, in Dharma, is generally called healing. Medicine actually reduces it from a more general notion of healing, which means how can you interfere in causal processes to make things better. In other words, what would normally happen if you left things as they were? How can we do something to change the course of events? So, if somebody's getting unwell in medicine, you want to understand the causes, and you treat the causes and the symptoms to restore health. Interfering positively, helpfully, in a healing fashion. So this meaning of Dharma is very, very helpful, very important. Dharma as what heals. In all traditions, Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, the role of the teacher is primordial. The Buddha himself taught that the teacher is like a doctor. All of the Dharma, which is so much, 45 years of teaching, filling more than 100 volumes of scripture from the Buddha, filling more than 200 volumes of scripture from the main commentaries and analyses. The Dharma is like a pharmacy full of medicines. We're like the patient, a little bit sick. So you don't just go to the pharmacy and say which is the most attractive medicine, which is the nicest smelling medicine. You go to a doctor. Or in some places, the most expensive medicine. Right? Medicines, a Chinese person will probably prefer a more expensive medicine because they think if it's more expensive, it must be better. which is of course not necessarily the case, but it's very much the case in China. We don't go to the medicine cupboard and take something. We go to a doctor, someone who knows, and they prescribe. All of Dharma works like that when we look through the Theravada teachings about how do you practice, how do you study. The role of your spiritual friend, your Kalyana Mitra, your guide along the path is very important. And even we look in very recent history of like Vipassana Buddhism with Goenkaji and his teachers, and some things they could and couldn't do because of needing to honor their teacher and not going to another teacher and propagating another practice. And when you look at the Theravada instructions about how do you get teachings, it says first you go to a teacher, you serve the teacher, you serve his monastery, and then after a while you say, can I sweep your floor? Or, can I do this? You make your face known. And there's a whole sort of very careful, very delicate. And then after so many weeks, you ask, may I request teachings? And they look to see whether they can accept you or not. This is in Theravada's own teaching. The role of the teacher is not just Tibetans who have gurus. And as we know, the role of the patriarchs, the role of the master in Zen Buddhism is all important. In Mahayana Buddhism, somebody who has the experience, has the realization, is master of the knowledge, is absolutely needed because we are in a state of confusion, one thing, and we only know a tiny bit of the Buddha's teaching, whereas a good teacher knows enough. They have a good enough, a sound enough, vast enough overview of the Buddha's teaching to be able, like a good doctor, to select from that pharmacy what you need. And what you need and what your best friend needs might be totally different. So the role of the teacher in Buddhism is always been there. When we look at what Buddhists themselves called the Buddha, they called him Buddha, the awakened one, but they mainly called him our teacher. Teacher, disciple, teaching. I need to tell you this because these days with internet, books, artificial intelligence, people have a kind of, we had a store in the UK called Woolworths with sweets. It's called pick and mix. You'd have about 20, 30 different sweets, all in their little squares, all the same price. So you can just take 2 of these, 3 of these, 5 of these, put it in a bag, weigh it, and then you pay for it. You choose what you're going to eat, what you're going to consume. Dharma has never been like that. Dharma has been that you choose which teacher you go to, which tradition you go to, if you've got a choice. In most countries, there wasn't a choice. People never left their countries in all the 2,500 years up to EasyJet century. Then people spent their whole lives in their own country, and usually in their own country, there was only Zen, there was only Theravada, there was only Vajrayana. But you did get a choice to which monastery you went to, which teacher you approached to see if they'd accept you for teaching. Sure, that's where we choose a teacher, a tradition. But then in terms of practice, the teacher helps you, works with you, gets to know you, and gives the teachings step by step, according to your needs, according to your capacities. What we certainly don't need to know, and we can never know, is all the Buddha's teaching. In the past, the greatest Buddhist masters in the greatest Buddhist study institutes only knew by heart half of the Buddha's teachings. That's already enormous. It's enormous. Some of my teachers had by heart 40, 50, 60 sutras they could recite by heart, many texts they'd learned. So when we are approaching Buddhism in our own life and practice, there's no way, unless you're training, you're like me, being trained from the beginning to be a Buddhist teacher, there's no way that you can get a big synthesis. You'd need to give all of your life. There's a very good guitar player. He's called, I always forget his surname. Forgotten that. His first name's Tommy. So anyway, and he was interviewed by somebody. And in the interview, the guy said, "I'd give my life to play guitar like you." And Tommy replied, "That's what I did." He spent his whole life practicing, 30, 40 years, all the time, improving, to play like he does. I'm not a terrific Dharma teacher. I'm pretty sort of low down in the scale. I was looking the other day, Dzogchen Pundop Rinpoche. He's got 250,000 followers, so that's kind of a, how can you say, world scale Dharma teacher. And quite right too, he's a wonderful teacher. So, but from late 1970s, I was being trained to be a teacher. I was asked to start teaching 1982. My whole life has been study, trying to learn things by heart, because that's what my own teacher told me to do. So for most of us, it's not the case. We're not going to, and Patra Rinpoche puts it very well. He says, well, unless you're planning to become a Buddhist teacher, why are you curious about so many Buddhist teachings? Goodness me, you've got Chinrezig, it's all you need. Forget the rest. He really meant it. You only need more and more knowledge. Why? Is it just another distraction? We were talking about distractions before the formal talk starts. Information hunger. No, we don't. So we need whatever our teacher tells us, basically. Now in Vajrayana, because it is the fastest, most fast-track Buddhist path, that becomes super important. But it's not only in Vajrayana. That's the point. Because it's fast-track and it's psychologically a very, very intense and demanding path, we have to follow the teacher's instruction. Otherwise, it won't work. Classical, cliched analogy, but you're going up a cliff face, you're learning to climb, you're roped up, and you've got to follow the instructions. It's a big drop, and you can get panicked, and then you're just frozen to the cliff face. You can't think of anything, there's nothing, your guts are trembling, and you've lost the plot. But it's the same for all Buddhists. So then, if we look at then the pharmacy that our doctor, Buddhist teacher, is drawing from, then we see this is embodied not in the real Dharma of our own transformation, that's real Dharma, We really are who we are. This whole bunch of thoughts, emotions, habits, everything we are, that's real. That's real Dharma. It's real, several thousand Dharmas all running together. We're a minestrone soup of Dharmas, so many bits of pieces. That's real Dharma. And we need real help, guidance, method, advice to change the reality of who we are to a new reality. That's all real Dharma. The advice and the methods are embodied in the conceptual Dharma that we find in the 3 baskets of Sutra, Tripitaka, and in Tantra. Sutra and Tantra, and then Sutra as the 3 baskets, Sutra, Abhidharma, Vinaya. So if we now look at those, the actual work according to the 3 main areas of the Buddha's teaching, let's first look at Vinaya. Vinaya is a code of conduct. The basic Vinaya from this first council, if it happened, and in all the Buddhist traditions, with some subtle variations, but in all the Buddhist traditions, is the moral code embodied in the vows we take to protect ourselves and to protect other people from us. Basic vows like not harming physically, not killing, not stealing, not lying, not bringing confusion to other people, no sexual misconduct, no intoxicants, and then all of the other vows. But if we look more generally, what is this area that the Vinaya covers? It's our interaction with each other. It's social. That area of Buddha's teaching is about how we conduct ourselves with other people and other living beings, animals, and our environment. And it's all about not harming. And if possible, benefiting. Definitely not harm. And wherever you can, bring benefit. If you're sure that what you want to do to bring benefit is really bringing benefit. So that is embodied in Vinaya. The Vinaya we have from the first council. There was one bhikkhu who everyone respected as being the authority on the vows the Buddha had given. His name was Upali. So in the first council, he was the reference for vows. What you should know about Buddhist vows is that the Buddha was never the initiator of those vows. Each vow came from a situation where people went to the Buddha for advice. He says we should do this on a begging round. He says we shouldn't do that. Which one's right? So the Buddha has to say, well, then, if you go begging, yes, maybe better don't do that. Yeah, rather do this. Every single vow in the Vinaya has a story. None of them were invented by the Buddha. They all came and some of the stories are wacky. They're quite outrageous, some of them. And the details are not really things to talk about in public, in areas. But anyway, we should know that all of those rules were made because of situations that developed. And people needed Buddha's clarification. And that's why he said, while I'm here and I'm a reference and so on, keep all the rules, but when I'm gone, not the minor rules. The whole point is this thing of the spirit and the letter. Try and understand basically what you're doing. So the guideline for all of our Vinaya is how to remove the harm we're causing to ourselves and other people, and how to bring benefit. So through the first council in Upali, we have the main vows about not harming. Through the various bodhisattva teachings, we have incredible advice about benefiting others, bodhisattva teachings. So we take the pratimoksha vows to stop harming. We take bodhisattva commitments to intensify the benefit. And in Vajrayana, the special vows we take are to make our commitment to our teacher cast iron, waterproof, leak-proof, safe. So that's one area. It's covered by the word Vinaya, one of the three baskets of the Buddha's teaching. Another area is in the mastery of our own mind. And this is to do with what we call our klesha, our harmful feelings, tendencies. The main ones, of course, we know. Lust, desire, attachment, or that one, that area of clinging, aversion and hostility, jealousy, pride, and ignorance. Ignorance in the sense of keeping ourselves at a low level as a human being, not becoming the wise, awakened, aware human being. We could become that kind of ignorance. So dealing with those is mainly done in private, through meditation, and the basket of sutra teachings is all about working with who we are from within. So not the public area of interactions with others, the private area of what goes on inside you and who you are in terms of your tendencies, feelings, attraction, aversion, all these kind of things, and the harm that they cause. So sutra is about that area, mainly about meditation, mindfulness to start with, and then from mindfulness all the other aspects of meditation that enable us to master our mind. So with those, so there are those two. Then the third basket, Abhidharma, is really our key tools to freedom, because it's wisdom. Abhidharma is about wisdom. And that wisdom applies in two main areas. In the basic teachings, it's the wisdom of no self. No one fixed self. No one fixed identity. And how the illusion of one fixed self, one fixed identity, has got us into all the trouble of samsara. So the wisdom of that we can only achieve through a thorough understanding of ourselves. So Abhidharma is very much about understanding the mind, understanding the mind in all of its details. Like we do with science, we understand things precisely in their details, deep down in all their structures. So that's embodied in Abhidharma. And then teachings on karma, cause and effect. So we understand how our own tendencies cause us to act. Our actions, karma, bring results of suffering and happiness. So Abhidharma, basic, is about no fixed personal self. Abhidharma, in the Mahayana sense, is understanding our projections on other people, on things, and understanding that just like there is no fixed me, what we have as our story of him, her, this and that is very, very subjective, but we take what is subjective through all of our conditioning to be objective, what's really out there. So Abhidharma wisdom is what brings us to liberation. Abhidharma Mahayana wisdom is what makes us Buddha. And in particular, we understand the two truths. So I did want to say that about the three baskets. So what happens when you're in long-term dialogue with your teacher, then they are sharing teachings, ideas, and methods, practices. They're giving you the teachings, or they're pointing you in the directions of teachings for you to study, and they're giving you practices suited to who you are just now. And they will come from those three baskets of sutra. Other than sutra, then we have Tantra. Tantra are the Vajrayana methods, which are rather different meditation methods, because rather than isolating ourselves from who we were, historically, who we are, what we've become, rather than finding a space of peace and working in that space of peace and developing new experiences. In Vajrayana, we use total transformation methods, where through visualization we transform our everyday reality, not just on the cushion reality, everything into a new vision of Chinrezig and Pure Lands, or whatever it is. Now, although there is a written there are tantras that are written with the basic information, Tantra is a living tradition of instruction that's held by teachers and shared with disciples as they need. It doesn't have so much the outer references in writing, in concepts. It's a very real Dharma of you are you, the teachers understand you, and they are helping you to work with you however is best. And of course, Marpa Milarepa is a classic, extreme example. How did Marpa most help Milarepa? Did he teach him sutras? Did he give him meditation practices? No, he got him building houses and taking the houses he built apart. The teacher knew best. Otherwise, we don't need a teacher. If we know better than them, what's the point of going to a teacher? We should be teaching them. So anyway, what I did want to point out is, in this session, Buddhism or Dharma as a historical development. And I couldn't even begin to describe even one thread of that historical development. The Theravada, the Mahayana, what happened up in Gandhara, which was an amazing place, and that influenced so much of what happened in the north. But what I didn't have time for today is the north and the south. You know, in Europe, I'm familiar with Europe a bit, and I had the pleasure of taking the 16th Karmapa around Europe for 6 months. And you know, despite all the cliches and the stereotypes, there is a difference between Northern Europe and Southern Europe. You know, when we were up in Finland and Sweden and those countries, the way they are, the way they speak, the way they think, the way life is, in Germany and north of France. Then you come down and it's south of France and Spain and Greece and Italy. It's different. Very different. And people take to things differently. It's such a different world. I mean, it's very interesting seeing Buddhism go into Catholic countries and how the Catholic countries are different, and how the history of being Catholic influences, taking Buddhism to Ireland and to Spain and to France, which were all Catholic countries, but not the same. Not the same. What they go for, what the people want to hear, and what they don't want to hear is very different. In France, somehow, when the Tibetan Buddhism arrived, it really caught on with the people who like a lot of ceremony. They like the Catholic, the dressing up, the ringing the bells, the better the costume, the more wonderful it is. It's quite attractive, not to everybody, but to a lot of people. And in other Catholic countries, they've had so much of dressing up and ceremonies and rituals. What they want is the psychological information inside Buddhism. It's different appetite. So when we look at Buddhism, and Southern Buddhism and Northern Buddhism, there's a whole area of interesting research to be done there. And we've inherited Northern Buddhism as it went to Tibet from India, from China via Gandhara to China, China to Tibet. We didn't have time to even begin to look at that, but it really is very, very useful to understand. And I've mentioned it before, but not in this talk. A couple of years ago, the 17th Karmapa started what was going to be simple winter teachings about the origins of Vajrayana Buddhism. And he obviously had talks with people very, very well informed about Buddhist history, as I've touched on today. And once he started looking into the language coming into India before it had writing, before it had Sanskrit, the influence of Asia, Central Asia, on Indian Buddhism. And then in Indian history, we find until just before the year zero, maybe the first century before the year zero, Buddhism, all spirituality was very spiritual. It was very intellectual. It was meditation. There weren't deities and shrines and rituals and pujas, which seem to us so typical these days of India as we know it. All of that came into India. So you get the time of like Bhagavad Gita, Indian texts, Indian practices, and Buddhists, where what was intellectual, what was prayerful, what was meditation, became represented in images, and then devotional Buddhism came about. But it's because devotional being was happening in northern India. So all of that is also Dharma. We're looking at Dharma. What is Dharma? According to mainly the Tibetans. But Dharma, none of us will ever know what the Buddha taught. There's nothing. There's no written record from his time. The compiled teachings of the first council were quite secular, and that first council seems to have been rewritten. What really happened was only written several hundred years later. We'll never know, unless you're incredibly clairvoyant or somebody invents a time machine. We've only got, as all religions have, the story as it's been told and developed over the centuries. And in real truth, if you look at it very pragmatically, we've only got what exists today. So in that, well, that's just a few things. We're carrying on. We've got one more session where I can finish off this general overview of Dharma as the Buddhist teachings. But that's it for today. So let's dedicate and then have a time together for discussion. May whatever virtue was created by this session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained. Through the main enemy, our mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by its waves of rebirth, aging, sickness and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not arisen. May its development know no setbacks, and may it increase ever more and more. Through this virtue, may we quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. Okay, so I don't know if you've got any reflections you'd like to share or questions you'd like to ask.
Can I have a question about culture?
Yeah.
It's quite broad. I've been considering this last year about when I visit, say, a Tibetan Buddhist center or monastery, which bits are culture and which bits are, I don't know, I want to say are not culture. It feels that Buddhism has, like you were saying, it took on different flavors as it moved around the world. And sometimes, say, for example, with a lot of ritual, I wonder about the essence of the meaning behind it. So my question is really vague, so I don't even know whether you can comment on it, but where's the separation between, Dharma as truth and then Dharma as, I can only imagine that it's an expression.
Well, I'd like to first reply with a quote. I can't do it verbatim, but I saw last week from Dzogchen Not Rinpoche, and he said, how I wish I could have been there at the time of Buddha to receive it directly from him. And he said, because since then so much, he called it religiosity and culture, has been mixed in with it, that it's very complicated. So I'm glad he said that. And I don't have to say it. And I think it's obvious that culture has joined with the Buddha's teaching in its manifestation in different countries, in different traditions, for sure. I think the explanations of quite which culture and how and why and when is not clear. There was an assumption in the middle of the last century, for instance, that Vajrayana Buddhism was a hybrid between, or contamination of Buddhism by Hindu Tantra. It was sort of unnecessary, but came in culturally, and that it was, how can you say, the spirit of it was not the spirit of Dharma. So there was quite a bit of that when I was in my earlier Buddhist years, and it's something I had to struggle with. Was that the case or wasn't it? But then once you get to actually know and practice each Tantra, you realize that what Buddhists did was that they took the various types of imagery, and it's quite naughty in a way, and they rearranged them with a Buddhist philosophy. So whereas you've got something that's a manifestation of a God, where you've got the idea of a God up there, God's powerful, they're different, they are beings, they exist, and we're just nothing compared to them, and they can smite you, they can bless you, and you better get down on your knees quick and give them offerings and whatever it is, live offerings. But you can take that and make the image be the very embodiment of no self, of voidness, the union of voidness and wisdom, a method, skillful method. And then people capable of devotion, which Indian people, as far as I've seen them in my lifetime, and I'm certain before, are so capable of devotion, so beautifully capable of devotion. I remember traveling on trains in the 1970s in India. People would just break into songs of devotion on the train. And devotion, properly used, can be our most powerful spiritual tool. Because if we're devoted to the right things, it can override the power of the intellect. And the intellect, which is our best friend to a certain point, becomes our worst enemy afterwards on a spiritual path generally, because the timeless pure isness is there. And our direct line to it, direct openness to it, the direct influx of all that goodness and blessing into ourselves can be stronger than our emotional tendencies, our non-stop thinking mind, which just goes think all the time. Devotion, properly used, can be the most powerful spiritual tool. So in order to help people, then Buddhism developed various practices, but what they're focused on, when you look, is never an entity, a being, a God. It is a manifestation of this primordial purity.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, but the cultural things, I think it's for each of us to do two things. First, work out for ourselves what seems to us to be purely cultural and unnecessary because of that. In other words, we don't need it. We can strip it away and say what's really going on here. The other is politeness. For instance, we don't need to prostrate like Tibetans. But if you're in a world where you're with Tibetans and in their whole cultural context, it's quite sort of polite and doesn't make waves. It makes a nice feeling if you prostrate. And so things like that, I think drawing our own lines about what we're going to do and not going to do, and trying to work out, but what's the really useful part? of this. So then it doesn't really work until you've got more information, like offerings. In Buddhist countries, offerings, it's all over the place. Theravada Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, making offerings, having a shrine with offerings, representations and offerings. So if you're just doing that to get points, to get spiritual points, so that, I made such and such offerings, gave up this much, it won't help you very much. But if you understand, like when you receive teachings on a practice, it says, at this stage of the practice, Tatara, why do we make offerings? It's because we are clinging and attached, and we're afraid of losing this. We're afraid. We need this. Otherwise, we're in a pickle. And in fact, you don't need nearly so much as you think you do. So the letting go. And then, why is our society so selfish? Why are so many people starving and poor, and some people have much more than they need? It's because we cling to things and we feel, I need this to be okay. So the thing of offering, we're offering to Buddha, who's gone beyond those needs. We know there's a mind, there's a state of being which is our true nature, which is beyond clinging to anything. Like great spiritual teachers, you can give them a fortune one day, and by the end of the day they've given it away. Couldn't care less how much it's worth. They don't need that stuff. So then our offering and our mental offerings, to work, we need the real feeling of, I could let go of this. I would rather offer it up, I'd rather offer it to everybody than be locked into a need for this. Then you've got the Buddha's message. But if you just go around lighting endless butter lamps and sticks of incense, and you don't know the meaning behind it, working with your own mind, then it's just cultural conditioning or a very primitive understanding of Buddhism that we need to accumulate points of merit. Because it's a losing battle. The points of non-merit we make all day long with harmful thoughts, selfish thoughts, and so on, are just so many. You're never going to make up for those with a couple of sticks of incense and a few candles. I mean, that's wishful thinking beyond wishful thinking. So I think it's for us to sort out the sheep from the goats. What's cultural habit, and what's the real meaning, what they call in Tibetan, it's Sonjiji Gompa. Sonjiji Gompa means the Buddha's intention for you. What would the Buddha intend for you? That's very important. And then the other aspect I mentioned, politeness when we're in Dharma centers or if we're with foreign people, just not making waves. And what's really nice is so many of our teachers nowadays, when people go in and they go to prostrate, they no, don't. It's kind of wasting your time, wasting my time. And not everyone understands prostrations. And then Taisitupa used to tell this amazing story. He said when he was a kid, his first teachers, like for learning to read, write, and other things, were disciplinarians, and so they had the right to beat him if he didn't do things right. And then the next punishment up from beating was to take off your lower robe, and you had to sit on nettles, right? Which is not very nice, stinging nettles. So he said before they beat him, they would prostrate to him because he was the great teacher. They knew he was a reincarnation. It was their job to discipline him and punish him. So he said, from my youngest years, people prostrating to me was what came before a beating. So he said, when people come in to me, there's still that childhood memory. And so often they just go, no, no, don't bother, don't bother. And then some people insist because they really think this is my big moment with a very important teacher. So I want to, they really mean it. So then the teacher has to, well, this takes. My dentist, one of my old dentists, every time you ask for a mouthwash, sometimes you'd hear him mumbling, that's another 20 seconds, kind of, gone from his timetable. And so, if you're a great teacher, then you just have to stand there for another minute and a half while somebody makes their prostrations, which are important for them. But, why don't you just come on in and get on with it and ask what you want to ask?
Hi, Ken. As you know, the Dalai Lama is not one for traditions like prostrations and all that stuff, for want of a better word. And there was one occasion when somebody was going to see him in his place in Dharamsala. He was nevertheless the Dalai Lama's servants or minders explained to this guy, wasn't me, what to do when you went in, like prostrate and offer a kata. And then he said, His Holiness will make it quite clear when it's finished. so he says, then you get up, but don't turn your back on him. You just come backwards and exit the room. And of course, the Dalai Lama did eventually make it quite clear that it was finished. So the guy got up, started to go backwards, but then suddenly realized he'd forgotten where the door was. So he wasn't sure which way to go. So the Dalai Lama got off his chair, came round, put his hands on his shoulders and spun him round 180 degrees and said, it's much easier this way.
Whoa, quite. But I was just thinking there's a whole market there of reversing cameras for prostrating Buddhists. Like these Google glasses, you can have a little lens in there and a camera on the back of your head so you can go straight to the door. Somebody can make a fortune with those.
On another occasion, many years ago in Dublin, when the Dalai Lama came to Dublin, and I was arranging a public talk in a big hotel. And before he came on stage, I had spoken to him beforehand. I explained to all the audience that His Holiness would prefer you not to do prostrations when he comes in, because A, it's not necessary, and B, with all these chairs you're sitting on, it's not going to be very easy.
Yeah.
But I had organized for representatives of various Buddhist centers and so forth to come up one by one and present a kata to him. And so the very first one that I called on got up and started doing prostrations, and everybody laughed. We discovered that when I had explained that no need to prostrate, he was the only one in the entire audience who had been out in the toilet, so he did not. But and the Dalai Lama was roaring with laughter as he always can. It was really funny.
I bet. Yeah. Thank you. Sounds like we've finished for today. So anyway, see you next week for the Dharma part 3 and conclusion in a Zoom near you. Okay. Have a good week. Have a good week.
Thank you, Ken.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Ken.
Thank you very much.
Ken. Thank